The idea of a free voice, be it the freedom of press, freedom of speech, or freedom of expression, it is a beautiful thing. Or at the very least, is one which has a great deal of appeal as it offers an undiluted expression for thought and to be delivered to the press, which many may say, as long as you're not, threatening or doxing or, well, depending on, well, I'll get into that later, or slandering someone like a certain turd and enemy of mattresses did. But anyway, these ideas may be challenged or applauded, but regardless, it is good that freedom of expression remains with less restrictions. However, it is one with both a Jekyll and Hyde to its existence. This is not a condemnation of the three freedoms, but rather a realization to strike me which I wish to articulate upon. I do not believe myself to be the first to opine on this. Hell, I doubt I'm the millionth one. I merely desire to craft my own take on it. While the idea of a free press and freedom of speech and expression is a wonderful thing, it is not without the possibility of perversion or abuse, particularly by malcontents such as Jean Paul Marat, who used a similar freedom in France during their abomination of a revolution to perform a precursor to the problem we now face with journalists sowing division among the populace. Like, he made names of those he disagreed with public knowledge as he slandered the individuals as traitors to their goat fuck of a revolution. In essence, doxing them, thus making them target for attacks, and worse. In addition to this guy, there are also those who willfully lie, such as Walter Duranty. And if you are unaware, he not only misled the American public and the world about the Holodomor, but also went out of his way to justify the brutality of the Soviet Union in certain cases. Marat and Duranty were scum, to say the least. Humanity at its worst. And both were more alike than I initially thought, but I'll have to digress for this part. I kind of realized this as I was, planning out what I was going to say. Can't remember how long ago, this was months ago when I started preparing this. But both were everything I detest about journalism, people who act in bad faith, men who were fine with allowing other people to suffer or be robbed of their lives, typical of a commie and a socialist-like mindset. Point is that the freedom of the press and speech and expression is a double-edged sword. It should not be biased towards a particular gender, creed, race, religion, political argument, alignment, social status, or sexual orientation. The free voice should be used without bias and malice because this right is one which can do actual harm. As much as it kills me to say that, it can do harm. Now, this is somewhat a detriment in society which have become less influential in this day and age because thanks to the internet, it has become more possible for information to become available to us. And thus we are able to perform our own research more swiftly. But this has not stopped misinformation being spread to the mindless herds of society. For example of this, look to Sheriff Arpaio, President Donald Trump, or Michael Jackson. Why these three, you may be inquiring? I'm glad you asked, random person on the internet. Because regardless of how you may feel about the king of pop, the former sheriff, and the walking spray tan commercial we once called Mr. President, you cannot expect me to believe that the media did not have an axe to grind with them. For Jackson, his fall from grace, regardless of guilt or innocence, would have benefited the press in selling tabloids by the rags who constantly talk about him, which would have benefited immensely from a conviction. I remember, going off topic from the notes for a bit, I remember Razorfist did a video. He talked about this, and he showed a clip of Jackson's lawyer. Someone told him, I think it was the guy who opened, I believe it's called Motown, he said, you cost the media worldwide millions of dollars with that non-conviction notice. And he said, basically, and he said as much, yeah, they could have made some money off his conviction with all these tabloids, but they didn't. And they've had it out for him ever since. For Arpaio, the Phoenix New Times had more than a few less than unprofessional motivations to cover the investigation into his office, as well as the accusation against him by the ACLU, a gaggle of race hustlers and instigators of division themselves, which, as far as I'm aware, were never able to prove their claims. Correct me if you have proof they proved it, please send me a link. For those unfamiliar, before his removal, Arpaio uncovered that the founder or the business partner of the Phoenix New Times, can't remember which, were enabling a child dealing ring or a child trafficking ring, and this led to the founders being arrested in the following May. So they had more than an unprofessional reason to be going after this guy and abusing the freedom of the press to use against him. And lastly, there's Trump. I don't even have to look to a particular example. The media took any opportunity to slander the commander-in-chief, calling him the usual petty and impotent insults, racist and dictator being chief among them, or fascist. I wouldn't be surprised if, like they did with Arpaio, they referred to him as a demagogue. They would seek to blame any grievance they had in entertainment to blame... Well, yeah, they would blame the God Emperor for just about anything they could think of. For example, look to the critics of Rambo: Last Blood and the Joker. Assuming they haven't edited the articles by now, and you haven't... And I'm also hoping some people who remember this didn't memory hole it. If not this, then they willfully bury stories such as the struggle snuggle game of the migrants who came to Europe after the ineptitude of our global leaders made their home into an even bigger shithole than it was before. And yes, it was possible to make it worse. I know it sounds like a crucible to do so, but it could be done. Hillary and her ilk ensured that. Now, this admittedly is not in America, this was in Europe. But I can imagine if the migrants did this in America, the media would have no problem burying it. Like, for all their talk of backing women, the press in Europe probably said the same thing, and they had no fucking problem burying the stories of what these people I just loosely call men, like I can barely call them men at all, did to those women. One of whom became pregnant. So fuck them. At risk of having my channel taken down or getting a strike, fuck them and fuck the media for trying to cover it up. And on top of all this, much like Marat and Durante in their day, these journalists are never held accountable for their lack of integrity, or tegrity. Every time one of these pissheads pens their articles and opinion pieces, which seems intended to cause further division between the races and genders, there is no repercussion for their reckless wording. They simply give a hollow apology or gloss over it, and their acts are just memory holed by the public, which is really disgusting. It's for this reason that every member of civilization should work to counter those who abuse the freedom of a free voice, be they the public or commentators on YouTube, as well as on the alternatives, Odyssey and BitChute, although I would lean more towards Odyssey, because BitChute, comments on there are disheartening, I'm not going to lie. But then again, I kind of brought that on myself by putting the name Stein in my online alias. But anyway, and combat these purveyors of disinformation, who I would argue have worked to restrict and prevent this freedom so that only their voice is the one which is permitted to speak. For example of this, look to the constant attack on YouTubers who have failed to fall in line with the mainstream leftists. This isn't to say they are a part of some Darth Soros conspiracy to bring down the West for funsies. I tend to lean more towards this being akin to a herd-minded dogma. It is for this reason you should make your voice heard, because for too long the vocal minority has been permitted to control the discussion and narrative, and it is past high time they were told where the door is, and like the normies should be, treated to the hospitality of a Caucasian in South Africa, minus the threats of property theft and violation. That, or instruct them to blow a bolt gun, depending on your preference. All three are my preference, I'm not going to lie. For those curious as to why I even care about this or why you should, it is something which can affect everyone. I care about the free voice as it pertains to freedom of expression and freedom of speech because I aspire to be a writer, and without the former and latter, I would not do as I pleased in my writing, or I could not do as I pleased in my writing with free agency in terms of the subject matter. I seek to write in the realms of supernatural, fantasy, and science fiction, probably others also. Like, I think I had a detective story planned also. But anyway. But wish to do so without the intent to force politics of my world into it like unwanted dong. preferring to offer my readers with escapism from the dreary world which we inhabit currently. Without the freedom of speech and expression, and all three, this could be denied to me, as the government could, and these activists could demand that I force my politics and propaganda into my work, or more importantly, the politics that they approve of, much like a need was intended to be originally. And should I refuse, sanctions and a possible bullet could be my reward for defiance. If the state had devolved so far down the road of a right-wing or left-wing dystopia. You should care, because the deprival of freedom of these three could not benefit the right to bear arms, and in turn would be robbed of the ability. We would be robbed of that, and we would not have the ability to combat our government when it becomes tyrannical. And then the government may then decide for itself how we will live our lives, your lives, and your own input will be greeted with the enthusiasm of RuPaul at a Klan rally. And to those who believe me being merely hyperbolic, look to the Soviet Union. With people who were stripped of the right to bear arms, if it even existed at all, and to speak your mind. The people suffered. They suffered, shall we say, some undesirable outcomes, mass executions among them. Like, just about anything could get you executed. Like, the death of Stalin dark comedy undersells it. Funny in a dark way, socialism and Marxism apparently strive for equality or equity. Well, the Soviet Union certainly brought some large equity. Equity of death to a large group of people in the Kurgan's adoptive homeland. To this end, cherish as well as frequently employ the rights our founding fathers provide us at your leisure, but do not for a second consider the idea of abusing it, or the others. Because those who proclaim only to speak their truth have abused it so plentifully, I imagine the free voice in their hands has become more like a battered spouse in dire need of a better option. And that's more or less my whole thing on these three freedoms, is you should cherish them and use them to combat those who, quite frankly, are a detriment to society. Like, that's how I look at left-wing and right-wing journalist outlets. Like, they have no problem throwing people under the bus. They have no problem sowing moral panics. We've seen this on the left and the right. They just word it differently. The left says, like, for example, video games. The right says, this is teaching our kids to be a mass shooter. Fuck you, Ted Cruz, also. And the left, this is teaching our boys to treat women like whores. Probably not the best interpretation of how their argument goes, but that's how I see it, and how I've heard it described in the past. It's just stupid. So we should be implementing these freedoms to combat misinformation and make the truth more publicly known, or at least provide a counter argument. Because if you leave an argument unchallenged, well, you get the goat fuck we're putting up with now. Like, if you've ever wondered why we have so many Marxists in the world who freely call for communism and ignore the fact that communism has killed people, academia promotes it, more or less. I lucked out. The college I went to, or the colleges I went to, didn't force it down my throat, but others do, and they get indoctrinated there, because the idea of these ideas are never challenged, or they are never provided the alternative argument. So, yeah, like, use these freedoms and protect and defend them as much as you can. I'm not saying you have an obligation. Well, on some level, I do think you have an obligation to, because good men died for those rights. Nathan Hale is usually the example I go to, although I don't know how he would feel about the outcome, but anyway. That's more or less my take on it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and have a nice day. Remember, the game was rigged from the start. And God, I need to think of a new ending phrase.